Well, welcome, as the sign says, to Contemporary Organisational and HRM Studies, Human Resource Management Studies. This is quite a nice course in the sense that I think it's got a very interesting textbook which is full of interesting real-world stuff in it that kind of tries to take us to where human resource management is heading from the kind of boring box-ticking, form-filling image that HRM has had at times in the past to actually engaging with the big issues that make a difference in things like, health and safety or, performance of an organisation, the motivation of the worker, and ultimately, of course, the profit of the company. Just wanted to say a few early words, though. There's a lot of resources up on Moodle, and the course coordinator put this together, whose good work I'm taking over from Dan Abel just for this semester. The resources are rich and varied. You don't have to read them all. You don't have to engage with them all, but I think they're there for a reason, that they will benefit you in understanding this course and doing well with the assignments. I often say to students, there's absolutely no point doing well with the assignments and not learning. I think the ultimate thing is if you can pass this course and learn a lot, that's a lot better than getting a HD and learning little. Feel free to contact me. I'm the stand-in course coordinator. I'm very available on email, often quite available on telephone, even though I'm somewhat phone phobic, as I often say. But very, very responsive on emails. If you haven't heard from me within 24 hours of me writing to me, it generally means that I've had so many emails I've lost yours. So write again and don't take offence. I'm definitely not ignoring you. In terms of your general work at CQU, and every university is the same, you always benefit from getting stuck in early. Dive in the deep end, start reading materials, read your textbook on the train or when you're bored. It's actually quite a good read. And also prepare a calendar in which you fix all the different assignments on into their different positions early, and make sure that you aim to submit and finish them well in advance of the deadline day. Don't leave things to deadline, because we never perform as well when we get close to deadline. None of us. A bit of butterflies in the stomach, whether it's exams or assignments, a bit of butterflies in the stomach is not a problem, but rigid panic has never been associated with good performance. So get into good habits and rhythms. Try and set aside a day or a morning or an afternoon in which you do particular things. Once things have been into a habit for 6 or 7 weeks in a row, you'll find that those habits fix in place and become almost a ritual. And you will have much less trouble doing the good things that lead to good results in study. Do the little things well, by the way, and this is something that I do really emphasize to students. They don't realize over the course of a degree in which you've got 8 times 3, 24 subjects, you can sometimes lose 3 or 4 percentage points in each subject, and sometimes a lot more than that, by simply not reading the questions right, or missing out on a deadline day, or doing the referencing wrongly, or getting the word count wrongly. Really basic stuff that doesn't take high intelligence to get right, but just takes a good bit of preparedness and diligence, a good bit of administrative care to do these little things right. Now let's say you did lose 3 or 4% on carelessness, times 24, that's 75%. That's a distinction in a single subject will be lost just on doing the little things wrongly. Believe me, 3 or 4% grossly underestimates the amount of percentage points I see lost every semester as a course coordinator to many, many students. Don't be one of those. While you're at uni, be like a nerd. Be careful, read extra, do everything the teacher asks you to, because ultimately this is a business course, and being good at business, as an employee anyway, is at a minimum turning up, doing a professional job, and doing what the boss says. And in a sense, your on-campus lecturer, myself, we are in place of your boss. I also find in terms of the tension issues, when you're relaxed, you tend to do complicated stuff better. Even though, of course, ironically, doing complicated stuff might make you a little bit nervous, but take on the hard stuff, the assignments, conceptual stuff that you're finding difficult when you're not tired, and leave the easy stuff for when you're exhausted or nervous or getting close to deadline. So with the assignment, do all the hard stuff up front, and then as you get close to the assignment, do the simple things like spell checking, format checking, reference checking, that kind of thing. That is simple to do, but still accumulates your points. And those last minute checks, have I really answered the question? Have I put in the sections that the Moodle site or the course profile said? And pay attention to the course profile too. Don't just look at that once when you sign up and ignore it. There's often useful information in there. Anyway, let's get to this week's brief overview, and it's all about Bolman and Deal, the textbook, and the 4 frames. Now, these 4 frames are not some sort of physical object like spectacle glasses that you'll find in an optometrist shop. These 4 frames are a way of looking at businesses, and I find even though there's overlap between these frames, if you think deeply about it, you'll see that that could be seen through, or could be seen to be a political frame, or it could be seen to be a HR frame. But conceptually, they're a neat way of looking at organisational reality. I'll just play you a little bit of this video from Lee Bolman himself, and it's a bit of an advertising piece, but at the same time, it's a nice little intro.
I'm Lee Bolman, and I, along with Terry Deal, am the author of the new 4th edition of our book, Reframing Organizations, Artistry, Choice, and Leadership. Start with the idea that how we think about our world makes all the difference, and that the world of organizations is both complicated and ambiguous, so there's not any one obvious way to think about it. But if you don't have good ways of thinking about a complicated world, you're going to be in trouble because it won't make very much sense to you. There are at least 4 ways, 4 lenses or perspectives for looking at organizations. People love the frames. They remember the frames, they find them very helpful, and they find that they enable them to both see things and to do things that they couldn't have done before. Structure, the rational side of organizations; human resource, the people side; political, the conflict side of organizations; and symbolic, the culture and meaning part of organizations. The 4.
So he quickly sums up the 4 different frames that way. We'll sum them up a little bit differently, but effectively I'm not going to contradict, of course, what the author says, but I'm just going to have a look at adding a little bit to that. Okay, so we've got the structural frame. Now, whenever I talk about the structural frame, I'm reminded of my dad, who ran a small to medium manufacturing company that was into export. I worked for that company and worked closely with my dad, learnt quite a lot about business before I went on to start my own business. But I remember my dad had he was a mechanical engineer who had very much a structural focus. And so he loved doing things like time and motion studies, measuring how long it took to put a washer onto a axle and how long it took to assemble a particular product. He had on his wall, he had a company chart that represented how everybody worked together and who was in charge of what and who answered to whom. You know, who was the boss, who was the head of the factory, who was the head of sales, and how it all interrelated with each other. He had that on his wall. He was very fond of writing down and spelling out how things worked within an organisation. This is typical of the structural frame. The human resource frame is probably a good example of how I ran my company. I was very much focused on recruiting good people and motivating them and paying them in such a way as to motivate them, and making sure they were happy and performing at their best, and seeing them very much as a resource to the company. and looking at interrelationships between them. The political frame is not, you could almost argue it's not an ideal way to look at organisations, because this is, as Ali Bolman said, about the politics and conflict, but it's a natural result of humans getting together. Humans are like any other form of animal, particularly, let's say, dogs. We have the expression in English, the top dog or the underdog. People will jockey and shuffle between themselves to see who's on top and who's in charge and who's working with whom and who's on whose side. This is where politics comes into it. You just, as a manager, you have to live with it, deal with it, because it's inevitable. And then finally, the symbolic frame. The symbolic frame operates more strongly or can be seen more strongly in some companies than others. So, for example, if we take an example of a company like Virgin Airlines. Virgin started out as a record company in London with Richard Branson, developing that with a lot of hard work from a very small base. I think it was in Soho, to an international airline. Not much connection between music and airlines, but there you have it. Now when we think of Virgin, we think of that small company and its origins as a hip part of London. Richard Branson with his long hair, his casual clothing, his charismatic style, his fun and rather attractive staff that he uses, and Richard Branson himself. Well, I was going to say, use the expression, he's an oil painting. I said he's an attractive man. Now, the whole company is Richard Branson, and the way he sets up the company with the colours of the airline and the signs that they use in waiting areas at airport terminals, all the way through to their magazine, and even the name itself represents a casual, friendly, sexy approach to business. That's looking at it from a symbolic frame. But naturally enough, even Virgin Airlines has inevitably got these other elements in it. We can look at it through the structural frame and look at how Richard Branson, as the CEO, controls the various departments all the way down to quality control within the food line, the airport meals and the airline meals that you receive on board. And that doesn't happen by magic. It doesn't happen by just looking after your staff or playing the politics or making sure the symbols are aligned. That comes from paperwork, administration, ordering systems, time management and structures to do with logistics and project planning. That's the structural element, and that's operating in any large company, whether it's got that sexy superficial image or not. So let's have a look at quickly some of the central concepts of these four frames and some of the challenges to leaders. In terms of the central concepts, as we've said, the structural ones focus on rules, roles, goals, technology, environment, paperwork, bureaucracy. That sort of stuff is central to a structural frame, a way of looking at it. You focus on those elements of the company. But human resource looks at it from a quite different angle. It's not unrelated, but it's to do with the human factor, the needs, the skills, the motivations, and the relationships between people within the organisations, making sure that they are optimal. The political frame, not surprisingly, relates, as Bolman said before, about the issue of conflict and negotiation, which is a form of conflict resolution. It's all about power, about competition between forces, human forces within an organisation. And the symbolic frame is often associated with things like organisational culture, the meaning attached to physical structures or the ways of doing things within an organisation. Bit of a spelling mistake there. Apologies for that. So the challenge for leaders working within a structural frame is to align the structure with the company outcomes, the things that need to be done, and the environment around the company, whether there's high unemployment or low unemployment, or whether there's a lot of competitors or not within an organisation. Human resource, again, the challenge to managers is to align the organisational needs and to recognise that organisations do have needs like profit and the human needs. So humans have a need to have meaning within an organisation. Political frame is looking at the issue of developing a saleable agenda, an agenda that you can get through in an organisation, and developing alliances or power bases to enable you to get some of the things that you believe are right for the organisation, to get them carried out, to get them followed through. And finally, the symbolic frame presents a leader challenge in that you need to work a way of creating meaning and developing the symbols of the organisation in such a way that align with the organisational goals and help the humans within your organisation feel committed, feel linked with the organisation. And you can use the symbolic frame in order to do that. So organisations under the structural frame, you need to remember organisations exist to achieve certain goals, and these goals are often seen within this particular frame as bottom line, efficiency, productivity, performance, and profit. And you have to try and reconcile these organisational needs with individual characteristics. So the person working within a structural frame may have a temptation to look upon the staff as pieces on a chessboard that they can manipulate to achieve the organisational outcome of winning the game of chess. But the human resource focus recognises that when people come to work, they are not chess players. They are real flesh and blood organisms that have a desire to come to work and have a good time at work, to relate to other people at work. Work represents a very, very important social milieu for the worker. We spend so much of our waking time there, it's not surprising that we bring our souls as well as our bodies to work. And organisations need people that to perform in a way that shows commitment to the organisation. Organisations need us as much as we need them to provide the pay packet at the end of the week. And so this issue of fit between the organisation and the person becomes a critical factor. When there's a good degree of fit between you and the organisation for work that you work for, everything is in harmony. Your performance sings. If things go wrong, on the other hand, people then engage in all sorts of counterproductive behaviours. And the textbook will help, and the course will help guide you through some of these counterproductive behaviours. But some of the common ones are absenteeism, where people don't turn up to work or pretend to be sick when they're not sick, or presenteeism, where they are simply there but not performing. It's just their body that's there. Their soul is absent, or their heart, if you like, is absent. Where they may be, at extreme cases, engage in sabotage, or more commonly when things aren't well at work, higher degrees of union activity or union participation, which is not always a bad thing, but if it is unharnessed properly and not dealt with properly, it can become very counterproductive for an organisation. In the political frame, the recognition is that the organisation offers a host, as in parasite host thing, a place where people come and can play out their political interests and play out the power side of human dimension. And decisions inevitably have winners and losers. Whatever decision you make as a manager, there's always going to be, to some degree, a person who is less well off as a result of that decision than someone else. And as these resources get unevenly distributed within the company, conflict arises and you have to deal with it. And the political frame is one that recognises the inevitability of these conflicts and the need to deal with it. Now, decisions within an organisation don't just magically get made and then carried out. Decisions and goals require you to persuade, to be successful in negotiation, to be optimal in your bargaining patterns, so that you do not win a particular battle, but lose the long-term war in relation to the outcomes of negotiation processes. Finally, with the symbolic frame, the key thing to remember is that things aren't always what they seem. A company can be advertising itself or selling itself through its symbolic, visible symbols in ways that are quite poorly aligned with the way things are operating under the surface. And you need to look beneath the surface and have a look at how the managers and line managers and the staff are collectively creating meaning within the organisation. And a good company will have these symbols aligned in sync with the way that the structure of the organisation is set up, with the way that politics is playing out, and of course with the human element of the human resources frame. I made a distinction there between the things that are visible, like the paint on the virgin plane or the branding or the signage in the airport lounges, and the underlying aspects. How does that really work within Virgin Airlines? Are people really relaxed and creative? Are they really being able to be themselves and express their individuality in the way that Richard Branson seems to embody? These surface aspects, physically observable, or they can be in the way people greet each other, or in certain Japanese companies, for example, they'll start the day with a company song, or the stories that are told about the boss or one of the salesmen of the year, for example, that get embedded in the legend of the organisation. These are stuff that you can either hear or see within the organisation. And then there's the stuff that is much harder for you as an analyst to see. The shared values within an organisation. How does it play out? Is it hypocritical in an organisation, or is it coherent? That the surface characteristics and the actual values that are getting played out in the organisation, are they matching each other? And there we look for things like, the unconscious or taken for granted beliefs within an organisation. For example, these things can express itself in some things that are somewhat visible. So, for example, if hard work is really one of the shared or unconscious values that express themselves in an organisation, and this is part of the symbolic frame, that can express itself in visible things like people turning up for work very early and leaving late, or it can express itself in much less visible things, that you don't see people, for example, in the tea room at tea time because they're still back at the desk sipping on their coffee while pounding away at the keyboard with one hand. Anyway, I think that's a bit of an overall view of the four frames, which is something quite critical for understanding the whole course. So I thought I'd go into that in a little bit of detail. I hope that helps. And just a reminder, please do contact me, particularly if you're a Flex student. I'm pretty well generally available. Thanks very much.